She was courageous, one of our first true aerial daredevils. Risk-taking was in her DNA. She explored the outer bounds of an unknown and newly emerging flight envelope. She didn't know this was a world reserved for others at this time in history. Hers was a focus, a sincere desire to not just learn to fly, but excel at it, be the best, fly with the elite aviators of her time. She was known across the country as Queen Bess, Miss Bessie Coleman. Bessie was born in 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, one of 13 children from African-American sharecropper parents. When she was just 3, her family moved to Waxahachie, Texas, where she lived until the 8th grade. Excelling in math, she was also an avid reader, in fact, an insatiable reader, her first books acquired by her mother from the traveling library. For Bessie, education was simply her thing, but everyone helped out. It was just that way in those days. She picked cotton during the annual harvest, laundered clothes for people in their community. Her journey would be challenging, but a journey worth taking. Enrolling in the Colored Agricultural and Normal University at just 18, Bessie was only able to complete one term before her money ran out. Returning to Waxahachie, working again doing laundry. But remember, Bessie was just getting started. Her avid reading had spawned an interest in national and international events. In particular, she was fascinated by aviation, those daring young men and their flying machines. It was a match for her personally, and she knew it. But Bessie also knew if she was to encounter this new world, she would have to move, and fortunately Chicago was now home for 2 of her brothers. So in 1916, at age 23, she joined them, enrolling in a beauty school, learning to be a manicurist. As life takes strange turns, her manicurist business takes her to the barbershops of Chicago, and the opportunity to meet returning American pilots from the war. Listening to their stories furthered her interest in flying. She was now determined to fly herself. But these were challenging years in America for a young woman, especially a young African-American woman seeking to fly. Bessie was convinced her future might just be in the country those pilots were returning from, France. So in typical Queen Bess fashion, she attended the Berlitz School in Chicago to study French. On her way to Paris, November 1920, her goal, learn to fly, earn her pilot's license. Bessie's trusty steed, her first airplane, the French Nieuport, her school, the prestigious Fédération Aéronautique Internationale. In June of 1921, Bessie was awarded her pilot's license, the first African-American woman ever. And it was 2 years prior to aviatrix Amelia Earhart. Her place in history was set. For the next 2 months, Queen Bess continued lessons near Paris from a French combat ace, and in September, sailed for New York, arriving a media darling. But knowing now the career she wanted, Bessie also realized that to achieve fame and fortune as a civilian aviator, joining the World War I barnstormers was just the route for her. But more flight training was required. They were more experienced, more skilled. So off she was, back to France. She knew clearly the advanced skills required to fly in front of a paying audience could only be achieved through hard work. Bessie spent 2 more months in France taking an advanced aviation course, continuing on to the Netherlands to meet Anthony Fokker, on to Germany for additional training from the Fokker Corporation's most skilled pilots. Her training was the best in the world, and she returned to America confident and enthused to launch her career as an air exhibition pilot. Bessie toured the country for the next 5 years, organizing exhibition flights and speaking at churches and schools regarding flying and her journey as a young African-American woman. She was a popular draw at air shows. Queen Bess had secured her position within the fraternity of aviators, accepted as an equal for her daring and skill. Her plane of choice was the famed Curtiss Jenny biplane. Most pilots purchased them surplus from the Army Air Corps. She flew coast to coast, often with those World War I veteran pilots she admired so much, and who shared their stories in the Chicago barbershops years prior. Her specialty? Climbing to an altitude above the clouds, shutting down her engine and diving to just a few feet above the ground, swooping up as the crowd roared with relief and applause. Throughout her now famous aerial artistry, Queen Bess included dives and barrel rolls, figure eights, and loop-de-loops. She was at the top of her game. But in April 1926, tragedy was to strike. While Bessie and her mechanic were ferrying her recently purchased Jenny to Jacksonville, Bessie in the front seat, Bill Wills, also her business agent, in the back, she had not fastened her seatbelt, allowing her to see over the cockpit sill as she examined the terrain. Just 10 minutes into the flight, the Jenny unexpectedly dove downward and spun, throwing Bessie out of her cockpit at around 2,000 feet. She died instantly. Bessie was only 34 years old, and the world had lost one of their finest young aviation stars. Though Bessie Coleman's life was cut short before she achieved her dream of establishing a school for young black aviators, William J. Powell, her close friend and World War I flyer, tirelessly promoted the cause of young African-American aviators, and in 1929 founded the Coleman Aero Club, through which he honored Bessie and encouraged other African-Americans to seek aviation careers. For her incredible courage and daring, personal determination to seek aviation excellence in her life, and for her positive influence encouraging young women and African Americans to pursue flying as the first African American woman to earn an international pilot's license, the San Diego Air and Space Museum takes great pleasure inducting Queen Bess, Miss Bessie Coleman, into the International Air and Space Hall of Fame.